recording this session, so just letting you know. And now I'd like to welcome everybody once again, and I'll just introduce our speakers for this afternoon's colloquium. So our first speaker is Dr. Suleyman Sertkaya, who's a course director and the Islamic Studies lecturer at the Center of Islamic Studies and Civilization at Charles Sturt University. He's my colleague. He has graduated from Marmara University in Istanbul, and he's pursued his MA in exegesis discipline, and he's completed his PhD on modern approaches to the Seerah, biography of Prophet Muhammad. So a lot of you might be interested in that at the Australian Catholic University. So his interests on research are Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad, the Seerah philosophy, exegesis of the Quran and Hadith tradition, and also the Muslims and Islam in Australia as well. So this afternoon, he'll be talking to us about a new paper that he has published, and it's called "What Changed in Medina?" So the place of peace and war in the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I'll just read his abstract and then I'll hand over to him. The Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, is depicted through extremely polar interpretations. Some perceive his life as a source of peacemaking societies, whereas others portray him as a warmonger or prophet of the sword, and use his examples to justify violence and terrorist attacks. The major incidents referred to in the latter context are the wars and conflicts that occurred after his migration to Medina. These conflicts are also prominent in Seerah narratives of the Medinian life from the classical and modern periods after his migration to Medina. So one can argue, he says, that there is a significant difference in the way that Prophet Muhammad acted in Medina compared to the Meccan period. This is mostly attributed to the Prophet the power balance, as the Muslims had little power in Mecca, which resulted in them enduring adversities, including verbal insults, torture. I'll just go to the end. So the article examines the root causes of the behavior and shift in attitude in this period. It clarifies the Prophet's goals and agenda at this stage of his life and highlights the attitude towards peace and war by holistically analyzing the battles and skirmishes that unfolded during the Medinian period. To attain accurate, and I'm just going to go to the list, to attain accurate information in this regard, classical Seerah works and modern research on the battles are referred to as the main sources. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Suleyman Sertkaya. We'll be listening from him first, and then we'll have our Q&A. Then we will hear from Dr. Munzer Emad. Dr. Suleyman, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Mashid, for this generous introduction and for the opportunity to present this topic here in this afternoon. So share my screen because I have some PowerPoint slides. So hopefully that will make it easier for me as well as for you as listeners. So you have heard the topic already. So what I'm going to do is as a content. So I'll briefly talk about the depiction of the Prophet's life, you know, how it is presented in Meccan versus his Medinan life. And then to understand this question, what really changed in Medina, and the overall concept of peace and war or prophetic stance towards those kind of matters. I'll go back to Quranic terminology and Quranic guidance, because that kind of is a theory or theoretical framework for these matters. And then I'll move into the application of those teachings and relevant passages of the Quran in the life of the Prophet, and go into a bit of a statistical details to really explain the reasons or if there is a change, if there is a shift in the attitude, what could these things be? And then I'll conclude. So when we look at the life of the Prophet, his life prophetic career is 23 years, and 13 years of this has been spent in Mecca, and there is no battle, there is no fighting, there is no serious kind of conflict. There are ongoing pressure torture, persecution aimed at the Muslims, at the Prophet himself. But Muslims and the Prophet, they really stay away from these conflict zones, and they don't really respond or retaliate. So there is no battle per se in the Meccan life of the Prophet. However, when we look at the Medinan life of the Prophet, the verses revealed and permission for war has been granted. And shortly after this, in this, Medinan period, in this 8 years, normally it's 10 years, but this permission and the first battle happens in the second year of Hijrah, so his migration to Medina, we see some series of battles. And this brings up that question to people's mind, what really changed? Because in Mecca, Muslims were little and they didn't have power, so they naturally, and they are forced even, to stay peaceful. But when in Medina they gained a relative power, some argue that he changed his position, and this power balance really had an impact on his decision makings, and some would argue, show his true agenda and purpose, which was to take over lands and become violent and whatnot. And as you can see in this timeline, many of the battles are happening in this time frame. But how we are going to really conceptualize this and understand this data, when you pick up a book or written on the biography of the Prophet, you will see the milestones are determined around these, exceptional circumstances, battles, and that makes sense to a large extent. Even Muslim sources, classical to modern, they have the same structure, and there is not much scholar out there that they can really free themselves of this approach. And this pattern has been followed for centuries, and it is still dominates the Sirah writing. So when I say Sirah, the life of the prophets and the presentation of that, in scholarly works. So the main kind of premise for this presentation is primarily this dual depiction of the Prophet in some sources, although there are overlaps, in the Muslim world or other sources, but in the Western academia or Orientalist studies, even if you go beyond that, from as early as the 9th century, we see the Prophet has been depicted in a certain way. It's heavily polemical and questionable, and it's overtly negative. He is presented as warmonger, and this has permeated in many of the studies. Let's say, after 19th century, in Orientalist studies, the tone and the approach has gradually changed. But this warmonger perception, which permeates the entire paradigm, has shifted to present the life of the Prophet, Meccan versus Medina. Meccan peaceful because they didn't have power. Medina is not that peaceful because they gained power. So some people, like Orientalist William Muir, for instance, he presents the Prophet as a believer who has protected by God, an honest man fighting against pagans. So this is the general kind of perception he is presenting Meccan Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad in Mecca. However, in Medina, he flips the paradigm entirely, and he presents a very violent person because of that relevant power that is examined. If you go to some even recent, arguments, particularly when these extremist movements were in peak in 2015s, around that time. So this is one comment. One example that jihadis were able to use to justify their beliefs was the example of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, who was a warlord and did many of the things Islamic states were doing. What is ISIS doing that Muhammad didn't do or wouldn't have approved of? That is actually, unfortunately, not the easiest question to answer. So many of these extreme groups are associated with the life of the Prophet. Some of these groups will find a way to justify their violent acts. Some people will also resort to the life of the Prophet to associate this violence and war to the life of the Prophet, and this is kind of understood, not much questioned, in many occasions, or perceived as a default position, and considering that he has involved in many of the battles, and there are some incidents that can be attributed or related to this recent horrendous act. So what I'm going to do after this brief contextual information or background, I'll talk about the Quranic terminology around war and battle briefly, and then we'll focus on mostly how this is applied. I think that part is really crucial to understand how this really applied in the life of the Prophet, how he understood and practiced all these teachings. So the first term, if you look at the Quran, there are various terms, but among these terms, three of them are really important: jihad, qital, and harb. So I'll focus on them. There are some other expressions in the Quran that can be somehow associated with war or conflict, but they are not really used in that sense in the Quran. It's very loosely used, those terms, as a confrontation, or like jidal, for instance, to argue. So it's not, it doesn't have much to do with physical fighting or those kind of things. But these three terms are really important and sometimes misunderstood and mispresented. Like the term jihad, for instance, many people associate that with holy war in modern times, which almost nothing has to do with the term. So the term jihad comes from jahada in Arabic, which means to strive, to struggle. But in the Quran, it is used in conjunction with fi sabilillah. So struggling for the sake of God or in the path of God. So it's always associated with that expression that this is in the path of God or for the sake of God. So terminologically speaking, it is an effort to remove obstacles or to, attain higher objectives of religion or to practice your religion. So it's an effort in many different ways to sometimes purify yourself, sometimes to remove obstacles. So it is an effort to have some sort of a connection with God. So, and this does not mean, or it's not equivalence of showing an effort in a battlefield to remove obstacle, although in a very restricted sense, it can mean that, but it is a more encompassing word to, show an effort in personal, moral, spiritual, and different forms of transformation or efforts for the sake of God that people in individual level or societal level showing. And this term is used in both Meccan life of the Prophet, as we mentioned already, which doesn't have fighting battle at all. And in one verse particularly, it is used with the term jihad and kabira, greatest jihad. So what is the greatest jihad then if there is no fighting? So this brings a lot of questions to mind, that jihad is an encompassing, a comprehensive word to actually live your religion or show an effort for the sake of God in the path of God. So it's a broader term. Qital is another word that used both in Mecca and Medini verses, but this is really has some sort of actual fighting component, armed combat, but in the application of this term in the Quran, we mostly see it in Mecca verses again in relation to previous prophetic stories. So mostly it's about their life in pre-Islamic prophets' lives. And this term is used in conjunction with fi sabilillah as well. But it is very limited, and it has a meaning of actual fighting and armed combat. There's another term which is harb in Arabic, but this is a very general term, and it is kind of two disciplined armies fighting one another, and it is never used in conjunction with the term fi sabilillah, and it has no bearing on the concept of jihad even. So these are, how these terms are used. When we go back to Revelation, like the chronology of the verses that are revealed and the application of that. So we are kind of looking at the Quran in terms of the chronology in the context of this discussion. When Prophet Muhammad started to communicate his message, gradually what steps are being taken in the Quran based on Quranic guidance. So when we look at the Meccan life, Prophet was asked to rise and warn people, and when he started doing that, people has different response. Some people take him lightly, some people they verbally assaulted him, some people physically assaulted him. So in that respect, Quran asked Prophet Muhammad and believers to engage in greater jihad with them, and then most of the details of this really goes back to verses suggest them to be patient, forgive them, turn your face away from them, don't hit ignorant people. If you are going to dispute with them, and then in the best manner have a dispute with them. So these are the steps, chronologically speaking, in the Quran that we found, and none of them has anything to do with physical combat or physical fighting. However, when we come to Medina, we see permission for war is granted. So this is the first step in the second year of his migration. A revelation gives, in the first year of migration, revelation gives permission. And then from there on, this span of this permission is widened. So Muslims become an intimidating power and deter the enemy. There are various kind of forms of that, and it is gradually widened, the extent of this permission. We will discuss that in detail. So then we need to ask, why these changes are happening? Why in the Meccan period, there is always emphasis on being patient, turning away, if you're going to respond, give it in the best manner. And when it comes to Medina, why there is a permission for war? Why? Because if you consider the first engagement, physical confrontation, first battle, they are still fighting against Mecca, same people. For 13 years, you are enduring patiently while you're in Mecca. Then in a distant place, 500 kilometers away, a permission is granted to fight now. Why not in Mecca? Why in Medina? So here comes all those questions and some speculations that, because of the power and whatnot. But when we go back to Medina, and what the story is long, what caused Muslims to migrate to Medina? It's a peaceful exit, really, not to confront and have this physical confrontation. So the general strategy is avoiding these people, avoiding conflict zone, and migration itself is a peaceful exit. But Meccans, they didn't stop. They are going to still put pressure, request, Medinans to give them back. They put a lot of pressure and even threaten, Medinan leaders that if you continue protecting them, we will be fighting against you in the way that is you have never ever seen. So historically speaking, this communication between leaders of Mecca and leaders of Medina is well documented, that they are still putting a pressure. But when we look at what is happening in Medina, Medina is a very interesting society. It is pluralistic society, but it was suffering ongoing battles, at least for good amount of 120 years, which the last one of them is very well known as the Bu'ath War. So these people internally were in conflict for generations. And the main reason why Prophet Muhammad came to Medina has to do with that, because these people are coming to Mecca requesting external person to find a solution, or some people to support those particular tribes anywhere. It's very, internally there are a lot of conflicts. What happens after Prophet Muhammad's migration to Medina? Within the first year, they sign an agreement, a constitution, which is known the Charter of Medina or Constitution of Medina. And Prophet Muhammad, he consulted with the Jews in Medina, with polytheists in Medina, and with Muslims in Medina, and they formed this and signed this agreement called Constitution of Medina, and they in consensus agreed that he will be the leader of this society. This really seized all the battles, all these internal conflicts. We don't see anything in relation to those conflicts up until certain time that we are going to now talk about. In terms of battles, mostly they are external. After the first battle in the following year, these conflicts or conflicts with, let's say, Medinan people or Jews in particular came to the picture. So when they signed an agreement and appointed the Prophet as the city-state's leader, his role has significantly changed. In Mecca, back in Mecca, there is only polytheists, and few Muslims are just, paid attention or accepted Islam. Very little Muslims are there, and Prophet is leader of those individuals, handful people. In Medina, however, his position has completely changed. Politically speaking, he is the head of the state. Any threat aimed at Prophet Muhammad or Muslims is a threat to that peaceful society that is already established by that constitution. So this is very important piece of document and an important part that we need to keep in mind. On top of that, when we look at from the within the tradition, Islamic tradition, Prophet Muhammad and his role, it continues to be a role model under different settings. So when we look at the Meccan life, it is kind of conveying the message, tolerating hostility and oppression with patience and nurturing people's faith in an individual level. But when it comes to Medina, in a societal level, rulings that relate to government, social organization, legal issues, international matters, all these things has been revealed at that time in the Quran, or that relates to that passage of the Prophet's life. Naturally, all the rulings or verses that relate to fighting and war revealed at that time as well, because that is the time that people are going to engage in those kind of things, and this city-state has already established, and no individual is actually waging a war. It's kind of a state's decision in a way. So it has a very particular context in terms of political circumstances, and in terms of the message of Islam being a universal message has different contexts, and this is the time that relates to those kind of teachings. So, however, what we see that when the permission for war granted in the Quran in chapter 22, verse 39 and 40, when we just look at that particular passage, those couple of verses only, it is very clear that permission is granted in self-defense. So, to protect yourself, your religion, intellect. So it's all, the context is these people, remember, they are threatening, the threats are ongoing. Since Mecca, they were already pressuring, torturing Muslims, but this continues in Medina, although there is a far distance, although they happen to, leave the city, they are now waging a war against them. They're putting a lot of pressure. So permission is granted first and foremost to, for self-defense. It's very clear in those passages, and these are very much aligned with the purpose of religion or maqasid al-sharia. There are certain necessary kind of circumstances that you can protect yourself if there is a danger aimed at your life, your intellect, your religion, your lineage. So it has to do with freedom of religion, like universal human rights are under threat, and in these circumstances permission is granted. So when this permission is granted, then what happens? One might assume that, okay, since it is granted, they started to wage war and they started to aggressively attack people. But when we look at the seerah, life of the Prophet, we see a very interesting picture there. From the moment permission for war is granted up until the first physical battle engagement, which is the Battle of Badr, there are 17 different units. I use moves or patrolling units to define this term. Sariya is called in Arabic. So Prophet Muhammad is forming a group of soldiers, let's say, appointing somebody as a commander, sending here and there. So up until the first engagement, these 17 battles are there, recorded in the seerah sources. But what is really interesting is in none of these moves, there is a bloodshed, there is a fighting that is happening, except for one of them, which was beyond the control of Prophet Muhammad, and somebody, just without the permission did something and Prophet Muhammad actually, he paid the blood money for that incident as well. So none of these engagements or forces or moves that are going here and there is harming an individual. Why this is the case? Permission is already granted. People are, kind of provoking Muslims since Meccan time. They were already under torture and harassment and pressure for a long time. But why these people are going here and there without doing anything? So then we need to go back to that constitution and the peaceful city-state that is established in Medina. So this is in a very accurate sense, is a proper state. Now has its security forces. So when you see a cop a police on the street, you are not threatened. On the contrary, you feel safe because these people are safeguarding the safety and security of individuals. So this tribal society or desert didn't have rule of law, nothing. So Prophet Muhammad, he formed a state, and he formed naturally security forces of that state. And he was sending here and there for patrolling purposes. So the safety and peaceful atmosphere established in Medina is going to be widened. That is his purpose, ultimate purpose. And he is trying to change the norms that was prevailing the desert for centuries. You know, if you have power, nobody could have said anything back in, in pre-Islamic era. So he's actually challenging these norms that, no, this is not accurate. If you are right, you have might, not the other way around. And he has kind of formed these units. They are going and coming without harming anybody, but giving a message to people, clearly saying that, things are changing in the desert. There is a city-state in Medina. There is a peaceful atmosphere. You cannot threaten that state or around that region. So he is kind of a power, becoming a power in the community for the greater good of people around that. Now, in the last part of this presentation, let's focus on the data about these battles. So after those 17 battles without a fight, now he happened to fight in the second year of Hijrah, in the Battle of Badr, and these things are going to continue, because of various reasons. So now we will look all the data, because we don't have time to explain everything in chronological order and the reasons and everything. But when we look at the entire data about battles, some would argue there are 80 battles, but the one that I kind of tend to agree has 73 battles, war-affiliated moves in the life of the Prophet. So there are different terms used in this respect. Some would use Seriya, which Prophet wasn't present. Some would and use Ghazwa, which Prophet was present. So when we look at all this data, in 7 of them, Prophet was present, and there is a kind of some sort of an engagement or preparation and whatnot. Or if you include some of the moves that Prophet also went some places, because some sources, they interchangeably use this term, it creates a bit of a confusion, but we can really reduce it down to 7 battles that Prophet was present. But in all of these battles, when we closely examine, actually in 3 of them, there is a physical fighting. Rest of the things are either single combats. So there are 2 armies, there is kind of preparation, it's going to be a battle, but 2 armies never physically fought each other. So it remained as a single combat. Or in one instance like Tabuk, they went to borders of Syria without a battle, they returned. But all these things are documented as battle or ghazwa or some sort of this in sources. So when we look at this data in terms of time spent,
Suleyman, can you wrap up?
I'll wrap up in a couple of minutes. So, so when we look at the entire life, it's of the Prophet is 23 years really. But in the actual sense, where battle has had happened, where Muslims and their opponents, they happen to fight, only in 3 of them there is an actual fighting, and this is very well documented in those classical sources. When they left Medina, for instance, when the actual fighting has occurred, when it has ended, and when they returned back to Medina, everything is pretty much recorded. And that gives us a fascinating data that only in 3 days, these physical fightings are happening in the life of the Prophet. Rest is either no battle, there is nothing happened, or remained as a single combat, or Prophet was not present. So that gives us this data. In 3 days, fighting happened. If you include the preparations for these 3 battles, it becomes 79 days. If you include all the things that Prophet somehow involved, but there is no battle, nothing, the number goes to 144 days. If you include anything and everything relevant to conflict in his life, whether he present or not, that goes to 392 days. And most of this time naturally goes for sieges or preparations. Like in one battle of Tabuk, they go for 2 months, go and come back, there's nothing happened. So it's 60 days in that sense. In terms of casualties, there is also fascinating data. Muhammad Hamidullah is a contemporary scholar. He argues that the Prophet's life compared to similar figures in the course of history is least deadly, most humane life. Because, in all these engagements, the number of casualties in his approximation, total number is 400. If you break down to those 3 battles that he was present, it is 219. If you include all those 7 things that, although there is no fighting between the armies, still the number is very less, about 500. So there are certain things that we can underline, he really, why this data is very or less, why, he used a certain strategy. So we kind of see clearly that his Meccan position is not because they were, they were not having a power. It was a deliberate choice. And he was actually intended to keep that throughout his life. But because of these external reasons, because of the threats aimed at his life, he happened to fight. And he was ready for fighting under such circumstances. And he actually set certain rules and regulations. So in short, my conclusion is there is a reason why he changed his attitude in Medina. And these are very much limited, exceptional circumstances. Rest of his life is really important because that is the source for positive force for nonviolence, peace, love, compassion, tolerance, acceptance, and respect. And that relates to almost 2 billion people, not the battles most of the time. And that is where Muslims are looking up to. And I think as a kind of scholarly academic studies, those the life beyond those battles are much more critical to be examined and to be explored. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Suleyman. And I apologize. It's such an interesting discussion. I think we could really continue. Please let's give him a round of applause virtually if we can, just like that. But I think let's open. We have a little bit limited time for question and answer, of course, but we will definitely take some. So I think, Suleyman, you've given us a lot to think about by way of, looking at the Prophet's life. It's an important, the statistics were quite interesting, that you give. And hence we have this depiction of him as, kind of a person who's kind of involved in a lot of battles. But I think the perspective you give and the facts that you give are quite interesting. I'd like to open the floor before I ask my question. I'm sure that there are colleagues here and researchers and candidates that would like to dive into perhaps your methodology or other questions. So I'd like to open up the floor for others to make this available for them. So please, if anyone has a question about this presentation, methodology, speak now. You may raise your hand up and I'll ask you to answer questions. Any questions, comments? Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Suleyman,
Yes.
if possible.
Yes.
Okay, that was a very good presentation, some new information for me. My question is, he quoted, Sam Harrison. Why these contemporary Western public intellectuals don't use the terminologies like, warmongers, or the term that they usually use for Prophet Muhammad? They don't use those terms for the secular leaders, their own secular leaders, who have been involved in much worse, situations, in wars and killings, and why they don't use these terminologies. I have never heard this kind of terminologies used for these contemporary secular leaders.
Okay, so that's the contemporary question from Hafid. Maybe I'll take one more question and comment, and then I'll allow Suleyman to answer collectively. Any other comments or questions from anyone?
I just want to ask, thank you, Dr. Suleyman. It's really eyes-opening seminar. My question is, why Muslim scholarship also, the Muslim scholarship of Siyar also focus on Prophet's war a lot? I understand the non-Muslims approach, but still, even in modern period, we mainly introduce his life in accordance with his, the war, whether he participate or not. And it is also reflected in other Islamic disciplines, like, jurisprudence or other things. It's a huge area, and it is mainly turn around this notion of jihad and war and all other things.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Ismail, thank you for that question. I think that's an important question as to why we see these Suleyman in the contemporary scholars and also throughout Islamic literature, intellectual history. If there's any final questions or comments before I pass on to Suleyman to answer them. Sorry, we're a bit short in time, that's why. Normally,
I have a question as well.
yes, go ahead, please, Semra.
First of all, thank you for that presentation. My question is about the benefits that like a defense strategy can have for a state. So I think we talked about like war, and I think the underlying premise seems to be that war is bad. But I think if we also look at it from the perspective of how like states, like how they manage their interactions with each other and how they defend themselves, and like who gets a say in like the international arena and who's powerful and like who actually can get anything done is always the states that have like the biggest defense forces. So in a way, like I think like of course like we don't like defend war, and we're not like sort of for war, but like I think it's undeniable like the place it has. And I think even that division between defense and sort of like more like sort of non-defense types, I think even that's a bit arbitrary, because in the end, if all of your opponents are like growing states and they're like a lot bigger than you, then you kind of have an obligation to grow as well as a country. So I think like if we look at human history, like the way colonization developed, if a country didn't colonize, then they were going to become extinct, right? So in a way, like the survival of the fittest, and if we look at all of those concepts, I think we also have to kind of recognize there's a need for war, and as long as it's regulated, it's better that it's there and that option is available, rather than completely disregarding it and just kind of taking on an apologetic stance and saying, oh, no, this isn't really Islam. This was just kind of like exceptional, and it only happened in certain circumstances, and it's only allowed in certain circumstances. I think like it's really like we can't, I think it's a bit dumb to say like, humanity like can completely get rid of war, like from our like civilization and the way we've kind of like evolved as a, civilization. So I think I kind of just wanted to balance that out, because I feel like we're always kind of apologizing and acting like it was bad, but like compared to what every other state has done, every state that's survived to this state, like they all participated in war, they all defended themselves, and they all at times had to kind of grow, not just kind of state and like as a small like small group.
Your legal background gives you that good question, I guess, from
Oh,
international.
sorry. Yeah, I think yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I think that we've got three. I was going to ask another question, but I think we've got enough to go with. I think Suleyman's got enough to address. So I'll hand over to you now, Dr. Suleyman, to address. Go ahead, please.
Okay, wonderful questions. Thank you. I'll follow the order of questions. So in relation to Sam Harris, why he uses that paradigm or those terminology, but out of a sudden disregards that or forgets about that in relation to current modern states and leaders and whatnot. I think he should answer why he's not using this terminology, not me. It will be just a speculation from my end. But I think from my perspective, representation of Islam or Muslims in that rhetoric is very much blind, to be very firm. It's very much one-sided anyway. So you wouldn't expect that that kind of people to say anything positive about Islam and Muslims. So it's already judgmental, and it's already overtly negative anyway. So, but why they don't use it, I don't know. Probably they should answer that question. So I'll move to the second one.
So, Suleyman, can I just interrupt? Would you say that perhaps it's, because I can interrupt, sorry, apologies if I do. Would you say that the history that you pointed off, because unfortunately we have a relationship with Islam that has been historically not been very positive, with the other communities. Do you think that this is a historical kind of handing down over? Sam Harris is just inheriting a tradition.
Yeah, that's like, as I said, that polemical view of medieval period on Islam, how Muslims or Prophet Muhammad is projected. If you go to the 9th century, where they didn't have any engagement with Muslims or with the Prophet, but they started to write like he's a heretic, and from there on, it really has an impact on the perception of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, or Islam to up until the Orientalist time in 18th, 19th century. That even continued to a large extent, and it is only softened in last couple of decades. And now what I can see in terms of how Sirah, how Prophet Muhammad's life is depicted in Western academia, at least, the focus has shifted significantly since the petrol has discovered, and that is about power as well, right? So I don't want to go beyond that, but you have to have a good relationship with people in a political sense when they have money and power. So that has a great impact on the perception to a large extent. On the other hand, because of globalization, people are living together. Like in Australia, Muslims are living with very diverse faith background people. That is another impact or factor why that rhetoric softened or changed its nature. But some people, they still use the same rhetoric that was used centuries ago, and that is one example, unfortunately. People who are more clever, they know the right language to use, and they don't really pinpoint those sensitive areas to provoke people, and they are much more aware of the diverse nature of the communities living together in this lens, which is more productive and more important for people to adopt and embrace that culture. I think that's really important. So yeah, but as you said, it has an impact. So second question, why Muslim scholarship also focused on that? That's a brilliant question, actually. I generally list three reasons. I can give a lecture on that, by the way. I will be very brief. First reason, Muslims, they did not come up to the surface of Earth from nowhere. They were in Arabian Peninsula, right? Islam was born in that region, and that region has its customs and tradition. And one very particular tradition is called Ayyamul Arab tradition. So Arabs, they used to record their history based on primarily on the battles, on the fightings. This tribe has done this, and this happened to this. So this is the way they record the history, or through the poetry. So poetry is the archive of Arabs. But the central theme for poetry is also either fighting or sexuality, really, if you summarize in 2 words. That's the main theme of the discussion. So this has a natural impact in shaping the early classical sources. Look at the first classical sources. They are about the life of the Prophet. Very interestingly, they are titled as Maghazi. Maghazi itself means battle. You're writing, documenting a biography of that individual, and the title is Maghazi. It's battle. And the cornerstones, milestones are all about fighting and battle. So that is, adoption of pre-Islamic, culture, and how it really impacted shaping that genre of Sirah. That's one thing. Secondly, when I said 3 reasons, second reason is human nature. If you look at the Hollywood movie genre in current day and age, have a look. What genres are most viewed, watched? Action comes forward. First, statistically speaking, 65% of people who are going to movies, they watch action. It is more appealing to human nature than anything else. And thirdly, the zeal or the kind of Muslims, they kind of wanted to protect those disciplines in their early forms, kind of, it is not questioned. Not many people are successful to think outside of the box in a way. So like this internal criticism needs to be exercised. Muslims should be able to free themselves of that particular perception and rewrite the seerah of the Prophet from a different angle. So that they were not really quite successful. I hope that addressed the second question. And the third one, just to be succinct on that, thank you, Samra, for that question. Actually, this paper is part of a special issue on peace and war in modern times. And my conclusion exactly talks about what you said. Yes, we are talking about these findings that, Prophet Muhammad was forced to fight, but I also criticize that there is nothing wrong in there. War and battles are part and parcel of human nature. They have its own context, and we need to appreciate and understand that context. And Islam, thankfully, has set rules and regulation in relation to this fact of human life. Battle is part of the Prophet life, but not the entire life. We don't disregard it, but we don't say this is the only thing. So that's, but I really refer you to that special issue and the conclusion remarks, which I also myself bring that although we are talking about that, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to actually provide the statistical, factual data to be able to have a sound understanding about the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the place of battles and war in his life. That is my ultimate aim in this paper.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suleyman. And I've just put the link to your article there for everybody who's attending. If you're interested, you can view those details in there. Well, we're a little bit pressed with time. Otherwise, I wouldn't put so much pressure in the Q&A, but I think we need to move on to our next panel speaker. Please stick around. We'll continue the discussion, inshallah. So I would like to now introduce our next panelist, Dr. Munzer Emad. He's currently working as a Senior Policy and Project Officer at the New South Wales Department of Justice and Communities. He's from Gaza, which is wonderful, and he's completed his first degree in sociology from Bethlehem University in 1996. He's worked as a research program coordinator at the Women's Affairs Centre in Gaza. He's migrated to Australia in 1998 and completed his master's degree in peace and conflict studies. So we have a good theme of peace today. And he's worked with New South Wales Police as a multicultural liaison officer. And I was very happy to hear his story on the Ramadan iftar as well, not long ago. He's occupied a number of positions in areas of restorative justice, crime prevention, and law access. And he manages several early intervention schemes that support young people and parents address offending behaviour. And lastly, and to top up all of his accomplishments, he has a number of postgraduate studies in criminology, international law, policing practice, and lastly, a PhD in law. Today, he'll be talking to us. I won't read his abstract so that he can take us through it himself. That the key topic, which is very kind of relative as well, relatively similar to, builds on well. It's about a contemporary topic, but it's tribal customary law in contemporary Jordan, conciliation and security through Bedouin justice. So I'd like you to help me welcoming Dr. Emad to present with us, and that's his presentation. So without further ado, please over to you, Dr. Emad. Go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Mahshid, for the invite, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today, and actually, in fact, for this presentation to be my first since my graduation late last year. I would like first to start by acknowledging the traditional owner of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respect for their elders, past, present, and emerging. In that spirit, I also would like to pay my respect for my grandma, who inspired me to do this research over 40 years ago. My grandma was a great storyteller, and we all very well know, and through my career and personal journey, which this research has been inspired by both my personal story and career journey, we know very well that telling the story and listening to a human story is a very much human need. So basically, I said in terms of the significance, in summary, the significance of this research. Over 88 years ago, I set myself to study and research tribal customary law in the Middle East. And what I discovered was quite significant and was not anticipated in any way or shape. What I found out, those four significant discoveries. First of all, the model of cooperation and coexistence between tribal customary law and state legal system in Jordan is quite unique and quite exceptional model, different from any other model that I have looked at in the Middle East and other countries. I have researched tribal customary law in 7 countries, along with Jordan's system. What also I have found out, there is a wide use of tribal customary law in most of countries that I looked at, and for a whole range of reasons, mostly because of the need and the falling state system, the pressure, and also particularly post-Arab Spring, I've noticed there is a significant sharp for the use and need of tribal customary law. Thirdly, what I've discovered also, the existence of tribal and revival of tribal customary law is actually paves the way for legal pluralism, which is an opportunity for societies and state legal system to actually kind of really coexist with other legal system in the local society. Fourthly, and also most importantly, we all very much know that tribal customary law has quite a common features across most societies. Yet what I found out in tribal customary law is incredibly adaptable and localized, which is quite an interesting feature for such a quite an ancient legal system. It tends to adapt itself to local factors and local cultures. When I set myself 8 years ago to do this research, I wanted to have an answer to three core questions. First of all, how tribal customary law resolve blood feuds and honor killing. Mostly we know, unfortunately, tribal and customary law in general tend to be associated with honor killing and blood feud. So I wanted very much to know, why is that the case? Why tribal customary law tend to always to be associated with these cases, and how tribal customary law go about resolving these cases. But also I wanted to know whether tribal customary law is involved in other contemporary disputes and crimes. And what I found out, it's very much, particularly in Jordan, tribal customary law is involved in a range of other crimes and disputes, even in contemporary social issues and disputes such as traffic offenses, neighborhood disputes, and even social media offenses. Lastly, I wanted to know how tribal law is actually cooperating and working with the state legal system in Jordan and the other countries that I examined. In terms of the methodology, I was able to obtain my data through three sources. The first source by interviewing tribal leaders, state officials, legal practitioners, and community activists, where I was able to achieve that when I traveled to Jordan. I did my field study throughout a period of 7 weeks. I also was able to observe firsthand cases of tribal settlement, of sulha, conciliation agreements. I also was able to interview people who were involved in these disputes and settlement cases, and observed and examined some contract settlement that came about as a result of these settlements. Lastly, I looked through news stories, social media, to see the kind of coverage on tribal dispute resolution, and examined the practice of tribal customary law in, as I said, in 7 countries, namely Albania, Afghanistan, Timor Leste, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, and Palestine.
I'm sorry, Dr. Munzer. Could you move the PowerPoint slide to the next slide? We can just see, we are only just seeing the first slide.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry, my apology.
Yeah, we didn't see the others. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
Are you able to see it now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Oh, great. Thanks for grabbing it to bring it to my attention. So yeah, that's in terms of what I was referring in terms of the research significant. Those 4 significance that I basically was able to conclude as a result of 8 years of study. Are you able to see the next slide?
Yeah, we just saw this. Yeah, we can see now.
The framework, yeah?
Framework.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's the framework in terms of answering these 3 questions that I shared with you. And then the methodology, which relies on 3 sources: interviewing key stakeholders, then observing tribal settlement, and meeting with actual people involved in these settlements. And the last one, secondary sources, in terms of actually looking at news stories, social media, and examining literature mapping for tribal settlements across 7 countries. Let me take you through the background of this research. Obviously, when I started looking into this research, I realized I'm talking about basically here about intertwined and overlapping 3 systems. So it would be really very hard to kind of really identify customary law in isolation with Sharia and local state legal system in these countries. In terms of what I mean by tribal customary law, it is often seen as an ancient system, semi-autonomous. A tribal has often been referred to, or indigenous in some cases. For example, why we often associate tribal law with Bedouin justice, because Bedouin tend to be seen as the basically nomad or ancient people of the Middle East in that case. Also, what we know about tribal customary law often get to be basically focused on collective responsibility, and the ultimate aim and aim of tribal customary law is really about achieving conciliation, because at the end, for tribal customary law to really coexist and survive, it's really about meeting the need of tribal people by coexisting and living next to each other. So that's naturally the focus is about achieving conciliation.
Dr. Emad, would you be able to click on the presentation full screen? I think it's a bit small. Yeah, just that button, that one.
Okay. Can you see that one?
Not yet. If you double click, it's still small. I think people want it a bit bigger, maybe.
Okay.
Apologies for the interruption.
No, that's all good. I got it on the maximums on this basically slide presentation.
That's okay.
Yeah.
See how you go. See the presentation, the full presentation. I think that's okay.
Yeah, that's yeah. I'm gonna stop sharing and go back again. My apology.
No, yeah, they just want to read the boxes. So
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So you're able to see it.
You can see it if you click on presenter's view. Yeah, this one, slideshow.
Yeah.
You double click that one. Okay.
Yeah, that's
all right.
That's where I am. Unfortunately, that it looks like it's quite maybe small from your end, guide. But you are able to see it.
Yeah, I can see.
So I can keep going.
Yeah, apologies for the interruption. Please keep going.
That's all good. So obviously, with regard to tribal customary law, we know and it needs to be acknowledged. It's as an ancient legal system. It's imperfect. It can be seen that it's not regulated. It's not basically hasn't been basically developed in line with the modern history between modern society between bracket. So that's basically in a nutshell what a tribal customary law I'm referring to. Interestingly, Sharia legal system has incorporated some of tribal law, mostly with regard to family dispute. It actually gave tribal law practices some moral legitimacy and made it even a spiritual duty for people to reconcile their differences. And I believe that in a sense kind of really even has further enshrined tribal customary law in some societies after basically the existence and revelation of Islam. Further, some other people saying that was kind of really quite a strategic move by Islam to actually tap on the local values and customs, and by actually recognizing them and regulate them and enshrine them within Sharia law. The third system I'm referring to is the state law. And we all know after the Second World War, the emergence of state law in many countries was kind of really a mix of sources, whether from British, French, and also was built on civil codes. These state legal systems were seen either as a bureaucratic or autocratic system. In many cases, are contested or fragile. So that's why it kind of really, in many societies or culture, was really the relationship between state law and customary law was kind of really a mixed of relationship, mostly either get to be there is a kind of really confrontation or not a harmonious relationship. The three core tradition justice mechanism I'm referring to, which is Islam mostly adopted, is the first one, tahkim, arbitration, the second one, wasta, mediation, and the most popular one I found, which is currently is get to be mostly in use in Jordan and other Arab countries, is the sulha, the conciliation, which is a combination of arbitration and mediation. Are you able to see this slide?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Okay. So look, with regard to this slide, I will be quick on because I'm mindful as well of time. So it's important to understand Jordan's model and why I believe this assisted Jordan to be quite an exceptional case. And that was my discovery, the research conclusion is prior to 1921, there was obviously no state legal system in the within the society. There was only one ancient tribal customary law, which is the Bedouin justice. From 1921 to 24, the appearance of state legal system created two systems that they are kind of really overlapping, and slowly the state legal system started to regulate some key tribal practices and streamline within the state legal system. Interestingly, in 1976, Jordanian state system moved to abolish a tribal legal system altogether. However, interestingly, kept the practices basically within to be existent and to be basically approved within the state legal system. What I found out over the last few years, basically my theory and my conclusion is now in Jordan there is two legal systems are actually working together hand to hand, and that's why what I'm referring to as there seems to be an equal partnership between two systems existent in Jordan. The features of Bedouin justice, those are the seven key features that seems to be quite visible when I did my research. The first one, Jaha community mediators, who get to immediately involve once there is a tribal, basically a blood feud or honor killing or major, mostly around serious crimes. This picture actually I took myself when I was observing an actual sulha tribal conciliation involving quite a serious blood feud case. Atwa is basically refers to a tribal truce. In most serious.
Could you please, Dr. Emad, show us the next number 6 and 7? We couldn't see.
Okay.
Apologies. Yeah.
So 6. This is the 6-1. Yeah. So basically, that's what I was referring to, the changes that happened in Jordan over the last 100 years. And my conclusion now, there's two major legal systems who seem to be quite independent from each other, yet they are quite in partnership after those changes that happened over the last 100 years. And then basically those are the 7 key features that remain active in Jordan in particular, and many surrounding countries like Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, for example. And what I was referring to, Jaha, is basically those tribal mediators who get to be involved when there is a serious dispute or crime. And their immediate aim is to basically reach a truce. So the focus of tribal law is to prevent a further escalation of crime, because if there is no truce, then there will be an invitation for basically a revenge killing. And therefore, the tribal truce, it's actually kind of really prevent an escalation of conflict within the local society. What assists in ensuring that there is going to be a compliance with tribal truce is the role of grantor, which there would be usually two guarantor, one that for the two disputed party, and their job is to ensure that the two disputed party comply with the truce agreement, and they would be accountable if there's any breach of the tribal truce. Tribal judge Kati is actually not. It's kind of really, unfortunately, almost this. They are almost disappearing because because they are not really. They are aging sadly, and not many of them have such a kind of really status or recognition from the existence of the tribal law and the Jordanian state system about 80 years, 100 years ago. But some of them get to pass it to their children because of the status, and it's very much get to be involved. Tribal judge only get to be involved in quite a serious rare cases. I'm glad that Brother Dr. Suleyman referred to blood money when the Prophet basically paid for blood money, which is again another reinforcement and reminder of how much the Islam and the tribal customary system, there's some overlapping. And also I'm glad you just reminded me as well, I'm glad that you made a reference, Dr. Suleyman, for Orientalism, because what I found this research very much also was influenced in terms of the perception and the views around tribal customary law influenced by the concept of Orientalism. The last two concepts I quickly would like to refer to is tribal evacuation. And interestingly, when there is a blood feud and honor killing in some more serious cases, the extended family of the offended party are expected to evacuate from the neighborhood. And the purpose of that is actually to prevent any revenge killing. Interestingly, what I found in Jordan, that both state and tribal customary law officials actually cooperate together in enforcing a tribal evacuation, which is I found a hugely and significantly interesting practice. And then the last one, obviously, the conciliation process. In terms of the finding of my research, these are again, my apology if the font is not really as clear to you guys. But in terms of the research findings, what I found out that tribal customary law is really quite unique with regard to maintains local stability, provide a quick, in many cases, cheap, free access to justice. It's understood and quite clear by the local view. It's not complicated like the state legal system. Emphasize on cooperation. Also embedded within the local culture and identity. So it's hugely popular within the local community. And that's obviously in contrast with the state legal system. In terms of the challenges, obviously it is seen to be inconsistent and unpredictable, perceived as there's a lack of fairness or against Western standard of rule of law and the universal human rights, which is very much, I believe, it's kind of really influenced by the theory and the concept of Orientalism. It's also the fact it's embedded within the cultural norms like code of honor and keeping the family related dispute private sometimes can be seen as kind of really allowing honor killing to happen, that was not necessarily my finding. Also, the challenges, it lacks some regulation. However, some argues actually one of the strength and the unique features of tribal customary law, the fact that it is flexible and it's free from regulation. And that's why it gets to be incredibly adaptable to the circumstances. What I found in Jordan is there is a model of partnership where the two systems get to one quite civil, modern system and one that quite ancient. They actually working together in responding to people's need. And there's a great use for tribal dispute resolution for quite a contemporary disputes. these are the three core, basically, principles that I found out tribal dispute resolution basically build on. So the first one is around minimizing risk and saving the face of all people involved in the dispute, even including the tribal leader, and restoring peace. So it's always about what I found out. It's about keeping the social balance and keeping the social harmony within the local community. And I believe that's kind of really what was appealing to the state, Jordanian state's legal system, because Jordanian state legal system found this is quite helpful for them to actually continue maintaining social and order. And very much as I have mentioned, the tribal customary law is embedded within tribal identity, but also not individual tribal identity, but also actually within the collective identity of the Jordanian people. And there is something what I actually basically named to be called as expanded tribal identity, which is like tribal people like to be seen as they are quite noble in helping out strangers. So there are many cases where I found and I observed that Jordanian tribal people were involved in actually resolving conflict for non-Jordanian people who were either on visitors, were visiting the country, and they were quite adamant in helping them in achieving justice for them. And the last one is basically tribal customary law based on the family honor and the honor of the sheikh. And that's why it's kind of really, the sheikh's role is quite crucial in observing and maintaining compliance with tribal law, and then tribal honor in general. This is quite a conception, like an interesting conclusion and discovery that I found, which is kind of really the contribution of this thesis. What I was able to find out that when a tribal customary law is quite basically the dominant feature in the country, and the local state legal system is falling, like for example the situation in Yemen, then naturally tribal customary system actually fills the gap and tends to be basically so popular but also so controlling at the expense of the state legal system. And that's what I call the dominant model. In the situation of Afghanistan, what I found out, when the country suffered long-term civil dispute and war, and the state legal system was corrupt and neglected and never kind of really looked or invested in tribal customary justice, then we end up unfortunately with a situation that is quite a dysfunctional both legal system, and it doesn't necessarily respond to local needs in resolving their dispute. The third model, which very much I found in Israel, when there is quite like a resourced and powerful state legal system, yet a controlled local customary law, then the practice of customary law in Israel, for example, I found out to be quite tokenistic, where it's actually pigeonholed and only used kind of really as a tokenistic or for limited cases. In Jordan, however, that's why I call Jordan is quite an exceptional case. There are two legal systems. They are both of them as powerful as each other, and both of them enjoy a degree of legitimacy, and they have also a huge support. Yet this has created an interesting environment where the two legal systems actually end up being working together constructively and creating some sort of a partnership to actually help the people and provide a meaningful justice to the local community. Here, what I refer to the metaphor of tribal justice through the journey of a camel. I'm proud to share that this was drawn by my daughter, Basically, to illustrate what I mean, why tribal just legal system, it's quite significant, and it would be a missed opportunity for modern state legal system to actually not tap on it and not even invest on it. So a tribal customary system is very much based on the philosophy of the journey of a camel. So the Bedouin and the nomad people in the Arabian desert very much master the practice of loading the camel in a kind of really careful and perfect way, because if the load of the camel was imbalanced, basically the camel would actually not be able to walk and would sink in the sand and eventually die. That's how the tribal and Bedouin people understood justice. So in their practice, in their daily practice in resolving conflict, they actually basically picture the journey of the camel. They make sure that any dispute, how no matter how basically insignificant it is or small, or seriously basically a serious conflict, they tend to resolve it in a delicate, balanced way, where everyone is basically winning for the purpose of saving face of for all the people involved, and for the purpose of maintaining social balance. And that's why very much in all cases, as much they also interested in repairing the harm to the victim, but also they are very much interested in keep making sure the offender's family is actually continue to be part of the society. And that's why it's about keeping the balance by maintaining social harmony, by rebalancing the load of the camel, by retaining the rights to the people who have been harmed, to ensure that there's the social balance continue with the society. And I believe why I actually refer to my grandma who inspired me with this research, that she very much understood that concept. In particular case, when I was a child, I remember my family was involved in a blood feud case where my family had to evacuate. She very much understood that concept, where actually she went out to the local tribal leaders and appealed to them and paid her respect by actually acknowledging the wrongdoing of her family, as a way of rebalancing basically the broken relationship that happened in the society. And that was basically kind of really was an eye-opening practice. That's how much is very much understood by ordinary people throughout the history. Finally, my closing remarks, basically why I refer to Orientalism, because what I found out through 8 years of research, that unfortunately tribes in general and their customary system tend to be either romanticized, get to be focused as, quite wow, fancy, basically community from a Orientalist point of view, or get to be basically described as basically as a quite backward, vicious, harsh, against universal human rights standards. And I believe that's very much because of the basically the Orientalist approach and the lack of understanding to tribal customs and values, and by also giving basically the right of tribal people to actually govern themselves and be able to determine what's working for them to achieve justice. Also, what I found out, there are obviously tribal customary law in many countries have been dismantled, whether deliberately or because of long neglect. In the case of, for example, Syria, I found out even in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there has been an approach by some modern legal system to dismantle tribal customary law, or basically neglect them, or seen them basically it's not applicable to modern social system. And unfortunately, that has left only a legacy. It's almost like just what's left of the tribal customary law is like a pyramid. It's like a history and not in an action. When what I found out in Jordan, it's quite an opportunity, an interesting case where actually tribal customary law can be used in modern day, can provide a solution, and can actually partner with a modern legal system in responding to quite serious cases and resolve conflict and provide tangible justice to the local people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munzer. Emad, such another wonderful, interesting, yeah, let's give him a virtual round of applause. And I really like that camel illustration by your daughter as well. Okay, I'd like to open up the floor now for everyone. We've heard from both our speakers. So let's, questions for Dr. Emad, anybody? Well, there might be, Layla's got a hand up. We've got a couple of hands up. So we'll go to Layla first. Yep, go ahead, Layla.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakallah khairan to both speakers. Dr. Munzer, your talk was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed listening to that. Just on the modern implications, noting your roles in society now and your job roles, have you had any sort of practical application that with your findings? Have you shared them with the local law system here, especially like you're working with, I think, police or something like that? So have you had any practical sort of uptake of what you found?
Okay, so before we get you to answer that, I'll just open up the floor for a couple of other questions and we'll get them all together. So Layla's question is a good, valid one about, presented this to any authorities or, relevant legal places here. Was there another hand up that I see, or was that yes, Professor Saadi Ujel, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much to both presenters. My question for Dr. Emad is that what is the role of religion in tribal law?
Okay, so that's a relevant question, I suppose, from Professor Saadi Ujel. Role of religion and Layla's question. I think, was there another hand up before I saw? Was there one more?
I just want to ask a question and maybe a brief comment. As far as I understand from Dr. Emad's talk, the Jordanian tribes are successful in really contributing to conflict resolution or other things inside the Jordan. But my question is, the reason for this success, there are, many tribes in Jordan, and also many representatives of these tribes in parliament in Jordan. Although Jordan is Hashemite kingdom, but there is a state parliament, and they are part of, the member of the tribes are part of the member of the parliament also. I just want to ask how these people who represent tribes in the state and also individuals in the tribe, non-state organization, how they cope each other, and really this representation also help these tribes to really come together with state and other organization. And the second issue is, the second question is, some tribes might be smaller than the other tribes, and it affects the influence also. There are quite a good number of cities in Jordan, like Amman or Irbid or I don't know, Kerak, but some of them there are powerful tribes, many members and many people in this tribe, but the others are not very big tribes. So in terms of, really these tribe customs to contribute to conflict resolution, it varies on the basis of the tribe's number of the members or not. I just want to learn this response about this question. Thank you. Thank you again for this brilliant talk.
Professor Ismail, any final comments or questions? And I'll hand over to Dr. Emad to answer. I think that Joanna's got a clap. No, that's fine. I think very quickly there was a response earlier from, but I'll come back to Francis at the end. So I'll allow Dr. Emad to address these questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mashid. With regard to the first question, with regard whether there is some local relevancy, especially within Western context, as I alluded at the beginning, I kind of really was inspired when I was doing some work. I've been working in the criminal justice system within New South Wales for the last now almost 25 years. And I was working in restorative justice, which basically about allowing offenders and victims to meet each other. So there has been a movement within some Western countries, namely Canada, New Zealand, Australia, around restorative justice. And basically that reminded me of my childhood. And I was saying, this is really very similar to basically tribal customary law. It's just the difference is this Western restorative justice get to be seen as a modern, basically within Western standard of rule of law, human rights, while tribal customary law get to be seen as backward, basically vicious, or it's not civilized. So I really wanted to understand, why this gap, and that's why I basically made a reference to Orientalism. I believe there is a recognition now of tribal customary law. There is a space to it, especially after Arab Spring, because there is a huge gap. And I was referring that tribal customary law is incredibly adaptable to local circumstances. And there is a case, obviously, it's not a system that is free from issues. There's obviously a number of serious issues that need to be addressed. But there is a missed opportunity. And I think Jordan's case prove that there is a case where we can actually work with tribal customary law in responding to people's need. Why I'm saying tribal customary law really needs to be acknowledged and need to be invested on, because firstly, throughout all these countries that I examined, in every single countries, tribal customary law enjoy legitimacy. It's embedded within the local culture and embedded within the local identity. So it would be very hard, and actually it proves, despite of all what happened in the case of Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, the tribal customary law continue to exist. Jordan's different. Why? Because actually Jordanian Hashemite kingdom did not try to actually get rid of it. In fact, actually wanted to tap and utilize it. So basically, I would love to see, if I'm responding to your question later first, I'd love to see a country like Australia actually get to be creative and innovative and come up with some practices that's actually by utilizing local customs and tribal values in resolving some disputes. And I believe this would be such a creative and innovative models in responding to people's disputes. So with regard to the role of religion, as I mentioned, Islam strategically and in a kind of really was very genius way tapped on tribal customary law. It did not, like some state legal system, did not basically fight it or did not recognize it or try to get rid of it. It actually adopted and incorporated into Sharia law, which was kind of really very visionary approach. However, this creates some challenges for a number of reasons. There are some overlap between those practices. Even some of the tribal leaders I interviewed, it was really hard to distinguish whether these are tribal leaders or actually are religious leaders at the same time. And conveniently for them, they actually love the fact they can be seen as both. They are seen as tribal leaders, but also at the same time they are religious leaders. I think the fact that Islam incorporated some tribal customary practices gave it some spiritual and moral backing, but also it actually allowed Islam to actually continue to really be in line and appeal to tribal people. That's kind of really my theory and my argument. If I'm answering your question with regard to the role of religion, there are obviously some cases where religion, Islam, actually interpret some tribal customary practice as it's against Islamic philosophy. but that's quite in extreme cases and in extreme interpretations. In terms of the last question, I should remind me, was about the reason for success.
Professor Ismail's question, I think the reason for success, I think, yeah, the context for, I think he was talking about that with the Hashemite kingdom.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. That's right. So Jordan,
some of the member of the tribal
correct
system, also part of the state
yes
in parliament, and it contributes to this success. I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
you're right, Professor. And what I basically concluded, I did quite carefully said it would be hard to generalize the findings of Jordan to other countries, or the model I'm finding in terms of the constructive model. I'm unsure whether it can be applied to other countries for a whole range of local reasons. Basically, Jordan is quite a fascinating case because, first of all, the Hashemite family came from Saudi Arabia. Just a very quick. This will take like many lessons and explaining it. But they came from outside Jordan. They very much lacked the legitimacy and needed tribal legitimacy, and the tribal leaders also very much agreed on the Hashemite family. Because they actually kind of their ancestor coming from the Prophet family, so there was a kind of really a convenient marriage or convenient partnership between both. Even in some cases, a minister like in it, you would find it so fascinating. Actually, there is no way that you would see this somewhere else. A minister, a government minister, would actually go to a tribal dispute resolution and appeal, and actually would be the mediator in tribal dispute resolution, and he's a minister, and that it shows how much it's basically the line is quite intertwined between tribal law and customary law. And imagine, like, in the middle of the night when there is an evacuation happening, the government see it as a necessity. They have no choice but to do it. Imagine in a tribal evacuation, actually the state police system observe the evacuation of the offending family. They actually observe them and protect them in leaving their local houses. Because the other option, if they don't do that, the next day there will be revenge killing happening on their hand. So it's kind of really, it's about appreciating the dynamic and the customs and the tribal values of the local area instead of ignoring it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just want to apologize that we have gone a little bit over time, but thank you for sticking around. And Joanna's got her hand up for one final question. Go ahead, Joanna, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Mashid. Sorry, I have to leave in about 5 minutes. Just thank you to everyone for the presentations. But I just wanted to know, Professor Emad, Queen Rania of Jordan said she's allegedly said, sorry, it's the noise in the background, said she's very committed to stamping out honor killings. How would you, if you were dealing with tribal communities and trying to, as you said, get that win-win situation, how would you deal with delicate situations like that?
Yeah, and again, this is another challenging. Thank you for raising this interesting and important social issue. What I found out at the beginning of my research, I was very much associating tribal law, I must admit, with also the kind of really the legacy and the guilt and responsibility of honor killing happening. But what I found out in very much, there's tribal leaders are actually taking proactive stand, and they're trying to stop honor killing. What needs to happen is when you dismantle local tribal system that is in existence for thousands of years, you will end up in a situation of like Yemen, for example, or other surrounding countries where there's and also there is a failing state system. Then it will become very hard to stop honor killing. In Jordan, obviously, the states and the human rights and social activists recognize that there is serious issues with regard to honor killing. And the best way is actually by cooperating and working closely with tribal leaders in making sure that honor killing is not get to be basically sanctioned by a tribal people.
Thank you so much. That clarifies a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's been wonderful comments for both our presenters in there. And Francis, you had a comment in there earlier on in the chat. If you wanted to quickly say something to it, I'd like to give you this opportunity and then we'll wrap up. So I don't want you to miss out, Francis, if you're there. No, that's okay. But I think you made a relevant comment earlier about after Suleyman's presentation. So I allow everybody to probably trust you all to have read it. I have let Dr. Emad's presentation and the PDF for you there, and also the link to Dr. Suleyman's articles. Well, thank you everyone for attending our first colloquium. We could certainly continue this discussion. It's so interesting. One thing I remember is when I went to Christchurch after the sad events of the terror attacks, there was a very, and the native Kiwi man, you know, from Indigenous man from New Zealand came up to me and he said, hand him over to us. And we've got our own customary laws. And he was saying that we will deal with him with our laws. And so I think in New Zealand, they do. I was going to ask Clive, but I think he's left already. He's from New Zealand. But they're certainly, like, it's a very interesting topic, Munzer, as well, about customary law and whatnot. And Suleyman, thank you so much. I think both of you shed light. I mean, there's aspect of, you know, war and peace in all of that. So thank you so much for clarifying that aspect of the Sira for us, Suleyman, and Munzer for presenting your interesting new findings of your thesis. I think there's much we've reflected on in by way of, you know, the new you know, looks, you know, new viewpoints that you bring forward in your research. And everybody else, we hope to hear from you. Please stay in touch. We'd love to hear from what you'd like to hear about next. And certainly our professors and doctors and researchers would like to have you present with us. So please send me an email. Keep in touch. Peace be with you all. Friday, Jummah, we're on a holiday for Muslims. So Friday, Jummah Mubarak, and Salaam Alaikum. Peace be with you. Until next time, you'll hear from me. Take care. Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.